Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to be talking about the 4 horsemen of Abyss and basically discussing why they are so great, what makes them so special, and what else you might potentially need for Abyss. Now before I already get my comments section filled, because one of the most asked questions I have heard pretty much everywhere about is like, if I don't have Human Torch, can I replace him with Void? Or if I don't have Symbiote Supreme, can I replace him with Dr. Doom? And the answer there is kind of like, yes, well, but actually, because these champions are unique and there are certain reasons why they work so well. And there is not a single champion you can put in, let's say, instead of Human Torch, that will cover all of the matchups that Human Torch does cover. You need to examine these a bit more champion by champion basis, and that also will kind of determine what is the easy path for you, because just because something says that's the easy path on the map that's given in front of you does not necessarily mean that that is the easiest path for you to complete with your roster and with your current champions available. And we're going to discuss that in another segment of the video, but this video is going to be all about kind of like the 4 horsemen. So the 4 horsemen of Abyss is how they have been aptly named. I don't know where it caught on. I think it was Metal Sonic Dude or maybe somebody else, but it's basically Aegon up the front, as in like the guy you want to take in for majority of your kind of like standard fights, unless it requires something extremely specific. After Aegon, definitely the most dominant horseman would be Human Torch, because Human Torch works wonders in Abyss, and he's in fact pretty much only character at the maxed out 5-star level that can kind of reliably solo the 3 mil opponents within the time mark for the matchups that he's needed. And after Human Torch, we have Dr. Doom, who also fantastically covers a whole barrage of matchups, which he does it by controlling opponents' power, never letting them drop their special attacks, nullifying loads of buffs, and just doing lots of damage in general. Also, he himself does energy damage, therefore he's able to fight like Korgs, so on and so forth. And it's a very unique character that kind of like seems to fit in Abyss pretty much perfectly. And the last one would be Nick Fury. Now, Nick Fury is arguably the least used one, but he still plays quite an important role, especially when it comes to dealing with some of otherwise more annoying or expensive matchups. And the biggest kind of like thing he has is the fact that he is stun immune and can bypass the whole Science Champion power sting mechanic they have got going on in Abyss. Let's start up with Aegon. Now, Aegon was expected to do well in Abyss, but many people thought that Aegon's time has passed and it's going to be time for Guillotine 2099 to shine. However, it turned out to be completely opposite. Now, he's not capable of one-shotting fights in Abyss, even at a maxed out 5-star, even boosted, even on suicides. Maybe he can one-shot like an occasional fight, but typically that's not the result. But what he does is, he does extremely high amount of damage quickly and easily, and also the fact that he's unblockable. He can shrug off all of the debuffs, bypass opponents' defensive ability accuracy, pretty much shut down that evade, kind of make him the most stable base attacking power you can possibly have, with the most amount of utility, because you can bring him in matchups where opponents place incinerates on you or bleeds, and you can bring him in without worrying about opponents evading. You can bring him in class disadvantage situations where opponents would have 10% evade. He never does really touch the 85k damage cap either. That kind of means that he's not gimped by that at all, but he has extremely consistent, extremely high damage output in general. And obviously the fact that you can ramp him up with his signature ability, and then when you're in the middle of the run, just absolutely shatter opponents without needing these initial ramp up fights, which is always great for longer quests with Aegon, is the fact that he gets his combo to 999 and then he is unstoppable force of nature. And he's also one of the reasons why he represents so well here is the fact that he doesn't need any synergies, right? When you're thinking about majority of the most commonly used damage dealing champions, such as Ghost, such as Domino, so on and so forth, they do require full-on trinity or at least a synergy partner. Now Aegon does not. Aegon, you can slap in any team anywhere and he's going to do the best. Now there are obviously alternatives, as before mentioned. Domino, Ghost, Guillotine 2099 can perform to some extent, and imagine highly ranked Star-Lord would be also capable of doing a lot of damage within 200 plus hits, if not even more than Aegon. The problem there that we have is they all have some sort of distinct weaknesses or lack of utility when it comes comparing to Aegon, because yes, Aegon's practical debuff immune. Aegon shuts down their Wades and he's unblockable, therefore he makes a lot of fights easy by getting easy openings, and all of the other champions that do a lot of damage are options. Obviously there are options, but they will not perform kind of close to the level Aegon does, in my opinion, and unfortunately there is no real good alternative to it. Yes, of course, you can build your teams around different champions, and if you do not have Aegon, you will have to, but that will definitely show in the total cost of the quest that it will take. Also, additionally, Aegon is pretty much, as we have seen, by far the most cost-effective way to defeat that final boss, Collector. Now, it's still not an easy task. It still takes around 5-6 attempts if you fully heal up, or 15-20 attempts if you just revive and go for broke. But the fact that you can get extremely high damage output right off the bat with the combination of being able to go unstoppable and unblockable does help him just simply chip down the Collector, even if you're not having much success in that fight. So Aegon will at the very least be saving you loads of units when it comes to dealing with the Collector, comparing him to any other damage dealing champion. So that is Aegon basically, and again, he does not have good alternative. Obviously there are other high damage dealing champions you can use as your base damage dealers, but they will not be able to cover each matchup that Aegon does. And yeah, so he has been absolutely irreplaceable and fantastic. And Labyrinth, well, he's not irreplaceable, everybody's replaceable, but it would cost you a lot more, and that will pretty much do for Aegon. That is why Aegon shines there, because he doesn't need synergies, because he has great amount of utility, and it's just very simple and cheap solution to do a lot of damage consistently and easily. Plus, being able to bypass that Wade is just another additional benefit. Now that we have discussed Aegon, we're going to move on to Human Torch, and Human Torch arguably is the biggest surprise, because Human Torch in matchups he does well, performs even better than Aegon when it comes to damage dealing champion. He's like the only champion that can reliably solo multiple fights with his own kind of like base damage output. He can solo your Morningstar, he can solo Mr. Sinister, Mephisto, Dormammu, and a bunch of others. And that is because, obviously, he's kind of like cheat code mechanic against mystics and champions that deal energy damage, and he's able to acquire insane amount of smolder charges. Also, in Abyss, you don't have to worry about Limber, so he can always parry heavy, and also in Abyss, you do not lose your combo charges or whatever they're called whenever you take a hit in a block or whenever you take a parry, so you can do that multiple times before you actually deal any kind of meaningful significant amount of damage, and it just works out extremely well for Human Torch. Additionally, he's like the only character that can bypass Petrify immunity and still heal reverse opponents, at least as far as I'm aware. There might be, Guillotine has Spectres that technically bypasses Petrify as well, but you guys know what I mean. There are some nodes, multiple nodes, where opponents are immune to Petrify, and since his Incinerates is not Petrify debuff, he's still able to heal reverse your Deadpools, your Old Man Logans, and a bunch of other fights, as well as Darkhawk, so on and so forth. So any fight where it is a large amount of health involved, and if there is some sort of healing present, if you're able to capitalize on it, it's going to be so much easier than trying to outdamage it or heal block it. So that is like a huge advantage Human Torch as well has. And again, with Human Torch, we are in kind of like a similar boat. Yes, you can replace him with Void for certain fights, or maybe Captain America Infinity War for other fights, but then there are fights like Deadpool where you have Petrify immunity. Then there are other fights, and there are some of the Mystic fights where you need incinerate immunity and great damage. So some of the fights, yes, you can just replace Human Torch with Void and he will work and he will do, but you do need to scout ahead and you need to actually check what you are going up against. So again, there is not a single champion in this game where you can simply take Human Torch out, put in some champion X, Y, or Z, and go in and pretend it's a Human Torch. So no, you can't simply replace Human Torch for all intents and purposes, but obviously you can replace him for certain specific fights. So whenever you do make a team, you do need to kind of like identify the matchups you would use Human Torch for, or he is mandatory to be used, kind of mandatory, and then find alternatives to it. And that is kind of like an important thing to understand. With all 4 of these champions, there's not a single champion. Once again, I think I'm going to repeat this like 4 times. You can take one champion out and bring one champion in and you're going to cover all of the same matchups. That is the reason why these 4 horsemen are so dominant in Abyss, because they cover pretty much all of the fights within those 4 champions. There are only 2 fights you kind of need to bring in a different counter for. But yeah, that being said, Human Torch, insanely fantastic and pretty much the biggest surprise and biggest damage dealing champion in Abyss, and is definitely really insane for a lot of it, and you can get multiple solos using this guy. Last thing I wanted to mention about Human Torch, last 2 things, he definitely greatly benefits from having Despair maxed out, because that makes reversing the healing a lot easier. And also that he does not need to be awakened. However, if you do not have awakened ability available in Human Torch, always save it for Mephisto fight. And when you do fight the Mephisto, kind of make sure you one-shot the guy, because if you will not, then it's going to be a lot harder to finish it out. But it's not a difficult one-shot. It's about an 80 hit fight. Only thing you have to really be careful in that fight is don't eat level 3. Other than that, you're going to have well more than enough time and chance to finish off Mephisto. And yeah, that's pretty much it. He does not need to be awakened. Save his awakened ability for Mephisto if you are about to encounter one in your lane. And that's pretty much it. And Human Torch is going to do the rest for you. Now, champion number 3 is Dr. Doom. And Dr. Doom seems to be kind of uniquely qualified for quite a lot of fights in Abyss. Now, initial idea of why you mainly need Dr. Doom is to deal with the cosmic characters, and that is to rely on Dr. Doom's ability to be able to nullify unstoppables or stagger them, because these cosmic characters do gain like a really lengthy unstoppable buff extremely frequently. Also, obviously, cosmic champions are naturally good matchups for Dr. Doom because they are extremely buff reliant, so they're going to be feeding your Mystic Dispersion, and you're going to be able to nullify a bunch of buffs, thus triggering Doom's abilities, and everything's just going to seem to work a lot better. And especially when you take a look at the selection of champions that are you're going to have to encounter in Abyss, such as Hyperion, the Champion, Medusa, all of them are basically perfect for Dr. Doom, and there is not a single kind of champion you can replace him. Now, Symbiote Supreme does work as a replacement for Dr. Doom for majority of the matchups, not all of them, but many of the matchups you would want to use Dr. Doom. Symbiote Supreme will do a fantastic job as well, and that is quite important to note. Again, his awakened ability is not important at all, pretty much, as far as Abyss of Legends is concerned. And even though his damage output is somewhere in the middle, it's not the greatest, it's not the worst, especially with the way Abyss and Rage work and the fact that you're going to be spamming a bunch of your level 1s that have multiple hits on them. You will not be able to solo fights typically on like 2.8 or million fight, which is like the smaller health pool. You're going to be able to do about 40% damage or so for most part, and about 20% damage on the 6 million fights if you were gonna use Dr. Doom. But there are a couple of fights where Dr. Doom's kind of uniquely qualified for as well, obviously. He happens to have a great matchup against Korg, which can be a really tricky opponent just because he doesn't take any damage back, and also because you can incinerate Korg and you can drop your level 3s, and he just kind of plays around all of the Korg's problems extremely well by being able to take a lot of block damage, thus baiting out heavy attacks, thus pushing opponent higher bars of power, thus not having to deal with Korg's level 1 nearly as often as most champions. And I have had fights in Abyss of Legends where opponent didn't throw a single special attack, and that is something incredibly characteristic to Dr. Doom, I would kind of want to say. Also, there's Red Skull matchup where he can perform extremely well, because Red Skull has a tricky and hard to evade level 2, and only way to do like a meaningful good amount of damage to Red Skull is pushing past 2 bars of power. But Dr. Doom can kind of like keep that Red Skull in between 2 to 3 bars of power for vast majority of the fight without actually having to deal with Red Skull's level 2. So that is also extremely kind of like good advantage to have there. And overall, all in all, he definitely was really great for many fights. And again, he cannot be replaced by any single champion for every matchup he would be good for. But I'd say Symbiote Supreme for some matchup, Magic for some matchups, Black Widow Clairvoyant would do a great job replacing Dr. Doom, but you cannot go in with an idea that if you don't have Dr. Doom, you can just bring in Black Widow Clairvoyant and you're going to be able to take all of the same fights. No, that's not how it's going to work. It's going to require a bit more thought process than that when picking your team and designing your path, which, by the way, is something I suggest that everybody does if you're running in on a limited roster. If you do not have all of the champions that are kind of needed, then it's probably best to design your own path to your account. And I'm going to be discussing that in basically the next video that I'm making about how to select your path and how to replace the missing 4 horsemen from your account, and which path would kind of like fit you better, and how to kind of have a thought process behind it. But now that we have finished talking about Dr. Doom, last member of the 4 horsemen is Nick Fury, and Nick Fury arguably is the one that's kind of easier to replace. Now, Nick Fury has some fights where he's extremely good for, like Invisible Woman, for instance. Fight would be really tricky with many other opponents and would require multiple revives, just because you would be working around that huge power force field, which kind of absorbs a lot of damage, so you need a character that does a lot of damage to begin with. Then B, you would be working around invisibility and missing hits and getting caught quite often, as well as chance that she's gonna evade. And then also you're working around the power sting mechanic that science champions have, where you either take consistent power sting damage or you get stunned and wrecked and dead. So Nick Fury kind of uniquely qualifies for dealing with those power stings, and as an icing on a cake is that those champions are science champions that are extremely easy for Nick Fury, because you get class advantage and none of them are also like bleed immune, and also they are kind of like really good matchup champions, like MODOK. MODOK could be a potential nightmare in Abyss just because of the power sting, of the auto block obviously, and everything else that MODOK has going on. But Nick Fury is unblockable, so he ignores auto block. He's stun immune, so he ignores power stings. You can just pretend that don't exist there and stay away from your special attacks, and all in all make that MODOK a really easy fight, same as he does with Invisible Woman. Now, arguably, if I take a look at the map here, which I'm trying to do in a second, basically you have 2 Invisible Womans, you have 2 MODOKs, so that's 4 fights. Then you have Gladiator Hulk, where Nick Fury does extremely well, but you can also use Human Torch. You have Yellow Jacket, where again Nick Fury is probably the better champion to use all in all, but you can also use, I believe, Namor or some other champions. He just makes that fight so much more easier. Then you have Green Goblin, and what else is there? Sure, there's some other fights where I used Nick Fury. Nick Fury did well for me for Red Skull, for instance, as well, and there are a couple more fights where I used him. But yeah, so he's not the champion you're going to be using for most of your fights throughout the Abyss, but you sure as heck are going to be happy when you encounter an opponent and you have Nick Fury when it's needed. And so yeah, again, of all 4 of them, I'd argue that Nick Fury kind of serves the least amount of relevance. Still extremely important, still will save you a lot of units, but you could kind of like get by with some other alternatives. In my opinion, relatively easier than you could without Aegon, Human Torch, or Doctor Doom. As a main two, I definitely would have to mention Aegon and Human Torch. So these are the 4 horsemen. That is more or less kind of like what makes them so great. And as a base idea, even if I bring down the game and quickly jump into the map, if you take a look at the map, then there are 5 paths on here, right? So out of 5 paths, outside of these 4 champions, as they are right now, you only need an answer for Havoc when you're doing path 3. So you have 2 Havocs on the map, both of them are on path 3, and that is like taking your 4 horsemen, taking an Warlord Guillotine 2099, or whoever else you are using to deal with Havoc, Colossus, or whatever, and then you're good for that path. And for path 4, where you have to take on 2 Killmongers, you need an answer for Killmonger to make it relatively more painless. So taking these 4 horsemen, taking an Archangel or Namor or whoever else, and you can be doing just fine there. And other than those 2 champions, Havoc and Killmonger, the 4 horsemen deal with every single other matchup extremely well on this map. It's kind of even comical to a degree, because for most part, yes, whenever you go, whichever path you do, if you have these 4 champions, you will be able to deal with every single opponent on this map. Additional help again would kind of be only needed for the Havoc, for the Killmonger, and when it comes for the rest of the paths, you can kind of bring in whoever you want, like Enjoy, or specifically if you have some sort of fight that you are afraid of, then you might want to bring in like specific counter. Like if you don't want to deal with Red Skull, then some people have been using Ronin or Green Goblins scaring you, then you want to bring in Armor Break Champion or what have you, basically. Or you can just bring in like a synergy with Quake, or synergy with Proxima Midnight for Aegon, or synergy with whatever else you need. And yeah, that is quite as simple when it comes to breaking down Abyss. If you have the 4 horsemen of Abyss of Legends, then you can do pretty much every single fight in here, and there's not much else to it. Have an answer for Havoc and have an answer for Killmonger and enough resources, and there's nothing stopping you from exploring this 100%. Now, next 2 videos I will want to record will be, next one definitely will be me discussing each individual path and which path people should take if you, for instance, missing Aegon, or for instance missing Human Torch, so on and so forth, and also how you can build your own path, because that is exactly what I myself ended up doing, because I went in blind. My first clear was a mixture of path 1, path 2, and path 4, I think, or 5, something like that. So basically my first path kind of crossed over into 3 different paths, and I had to wiggle about my way there, and that also kind of helped me to figure out the whole layout of Abyss quite a bit better, which is what I'm going to be trying to discuss and talk about in the next video. And after that, we're going to be discussing the matchups and fight replacements for these 4 horsemen. And for now, that will do. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, do leave a like, do drop a comment, do let me know what you think. Let me know what kind of content in general you would like to see regarding Abyss of Legends. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, why not share it with your friends and alliance mates, and maybe they have something they want to add as well. So that will pretty much do for today, and I'm gonna catch you guys next time. See ya.